Let's open up the case file on one of the most baffling and honestly, one of the most fascinating quirks of the human mind. We're about to take a little trip into the shadows of our own perception, a place where that line between confidence and competence gets, well, it gets really blurry. This is our investigation into the Dunning-Kruger effect. Our investigation really begins, like so many do, with a piece of wisdom that's centuries old. Shakespeare pretty much nailed it. This whole mystery of self-awareness, it's not new. This quote, it just perfectly sets the stage for the puzzle we're about to piece together. Why is it that some people can be so absolutely certain, even when they are absolutely certainly wrong? So let's get right into the case. Here's the central question. Why do some people, especially those who are just starting out, seem to be completely and blissfully unaware of how much they don't know? And look, this isn't about being smart or not smart in general. It's about a very specific kind of cognitive blind spot. I mean, think about it for a second. We've all seen this, right? Maybe we've even been that person. You learn like 5 phrases in a new language, and all of a sudden you're ready to book a trip and chat with the locals. Or you take a couple of driving lessons and you feel like you could handle a Formula One car. That first rush of overconfidence, even while you're making all the rookie mistakes, that's our first major clue.
You know who put it best? David Dunning himself, one of the psychologists who literally wrote the book on this. He said this, and it's just perfect. The whole paradox, the entire nature of this bias, is that it's invisible to the person who has it. So, how exactly does this club work?
Okay, it's time. Time to introduce the prime suspect in our case, the original psychological theory that kicked this whole thing off. And it's a really elegant, if a little unsettling, explanation for what we're seeing. So here it is, the official charge sheet. First laid out in a now famous 1999 study by psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger, the effect is this. It's a cognitive bias where folks with low skill in a certain area, and this could be anything, logical reasoning, grammar, even knowing what's funny, they don't just slightly misjudge their ability, they massively overestimate it. And look, this right here, this is the hard evidence, the smoking gun from that original study. Check out the people in the bottom quarter of performers. Their actual scores were, on average, down around the 12th percentile. But when asked how they thought they did, they placed themselves at the 62nd percentile. I mean, that is a staggering, mind-boggling gap between perception and reality. And this is what Dunning and Kruger called the dual burden. Think of it like a 1-2 punch. First, the person just doesn't have the skills to get the right answers. But second, and this is the real kicker, they lack the exact same skills that are needed to even spot what a right answer looks like in the first place. Their own incompetence basically robs them of the very ability to see it. So, case closed, right? Not so fast. See, every good investigation has a plot twist. And in this story, a whole different group of detectives, data scientists and statisticians, showed up to the scene and started asking some very tough questions. They pose this really compelling question. What if this signature curve, this dramatic graph we're all looking at, isn't actually some deep flaw in our psychology? What if it's just a statistical illusion, a ghost in the machine of data analysis, something created by the very way we measure things in the first place? This is the counter theory, and it threatens to turn our entire case on its head. So the statistical case, it really rests on 3 key pieces of evidence. First off, you've got something called regression to the mean. Basically, extreme scores have a natural tendency to be less extreme the next time you measure. Second, simple boundary constraints. If you score a 5 out of 100, your guess about your score can't go much lower, right? But it has a ton of room to be an overestimate, and the opposite is true if you score a 95. And finally, you have the good old better than average effect, which is just that most of us tend to think we're a little bit above average at most things. The argument is, if you combine these 3 forces, you can pretty much create the Dunning-Kruger curve from scratch. No psychology needed. Okay, so the investigation is getting wider now, because it turns out it's not just the unskilled who get it wrong. That Dunning-Kruger curve, it shows something really curious happening at the other end of the spectrum, with the real experts. Yeah, this is sometimes called the expert dip. High performers, because a task feels so easy and natural to them, they often make the complete opposite mistake. They underestimate just how good they are compared to everyone else. They figure, hey, that was easy for me, so it must be easy for everyone. They are literally robbed of the ability to see how special their talent is. Now, you might be hearing this and thinking, wait a minute,
That sounds a lot like imposter syndrome. And you're right, they're definitely related. But check this out, they're basically polar opposites. The Dunning-Kruger effect is overestimation by a novice who has no idea they have a skill gap. Imposter syndrome, on the other hand, is underestimation by an expert who is so hyper-aware of all the complexity that they feel like a total fraud, even though they're incredibly competent. It's two sides of the very same coin, cognitive miscalibration.
So we've weighed the psychological evidence, we've considered the statistical arguments, and now we're at the final revelation. And this is the part where the investigation stops being about other people and starts being about us. Because here's the real twist. The true value in understanding all of this isn't to get some fancy new label for your annoying cousin or that politician you can't stand. The big secret is that we are all susceptible to this. Every single one of us has what's called a blind spot bias. We're great at seeing these flaws in others, but we're terrible at seeing them in ourselves. The real point of this investigation is self-reflection. So what's the antidote? How do we escape the trap? Well, for that, we have to step away from psychology and turn to philosophy. The solution is something called Socratic ignorance. And no, this doesn't mean you go around saying, "I know nothing." It's actually a powerful wisdom-building habit. It's the profound awareness of knowing the boundaries of your own knowledge, of knowing what you don't know. This whole idea actually maps out the path to true skill perfectly. We all start at stage 1, unconscious incompetence. That's the peak of Mount Dunning-Kruger. But the critical leap, that Socratic moment, is when you move to stage 2, conscious incompetence. It's that painful, humbling, but totally necessary moment when you finally realize, oh wow, I have so much to learn. And it's only from that point that you can climb towards real skill and eventually mastery.
So, as we close this case file, I'm just going to leave you with a question. Look, we all have things we're good at, and we all have blind spots. The truly wise person isn't the one who has all the answers, but the one who's brave enough to ask themselves this question. In what area of my life am I standing on a tiny little peak of confidence, totally unaware of the vast mountain of knowledge that's sitting right there, just beyond my view?